After entering the palace, Emperor Yangfeng and the imperial preceptor were already present. There was also an ugly man beside them whose face was covered in warts and who was currently diagnosing their injuries. When Qin Mu entered, Emperor Yangfeng looked up and smiled, addressing him as Palace Grandee. The wart-covered man also turned toward Qin Mu and revealed a strange grin. His appearance and smile made him resemble a huge toad that had transformed into a spirit. With a smile that seemed almost like a crying expression, he addressed Qin Mu as junior brother and asked whether their teacher, the old man, was still doing well. Qin Mu immediately stopped, stretched out his hand to block Ling Yusho from advancing, and recognized the man before him as the Little Poison King. Little Poison King smiled and said that Qin Mu seemed very wary of him, even though they were senior and junior brothers who had never met before and should have been closer. Qin Mu lowered his arms. He had already heard rumors about Little Poison King and had also heard Empress Dowager mention him. He knew that Apothecary had once cut off his own face and hidden himself in great ruins because of Little Poison King. Little Poison King had been Apothecary's most proud disciple, but he betrayed his master by revealing that Jade-Face Playboy was actually Poison King. Jade-Face Playboy and Poison King had originally been regarded as two completely different people in the martial world. Jade-Face Playboy was an exceptionally handsome, tall, attractive, heroic, and charming man who treated everyone politely and warmly. Women naturally gathered around him, so he did not need to pursue them, and although many men envied him, they could not bring themselves to hate him because of his outstanding appearance and demeanor. Poison King, on the other hand, had a fierce appearance and ruthless methods. His reputation was extremely notorious because he had killed countless experts and had once poisoned an entire righteous sect, leaving no survivors. Even Dao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery had suffered many deaths because of his poison. Poison King's cultivation was not particularly high, but his attainments in poison and venomous insects were extraordinarily profound. The righteous and devil paths had repeatedly organized ambushes to capture him, even mobilizing several cult master-level existences. Yet none succeeded. Instead, those who attempted to capture him all died from his poison. Poison King always wore a green mask with tusks, so nobody knew his true appearance. Only after Little Poison King revealed the truth did everyone learn that the terrifying Poison King was actually the dissolute and handsome Jade-Face Playboy. Once this identity was exposed, the situation became extremely complicated. Some people wanted to kill Poison King, while many women fought among themselves for him, and even Empress Dowager became involved. Because of this, Apothecary had no choice but to cut off his face and sever himself from all those relationships. He then went into hiding in great ruins and did not dare leave for the rest of his life. Little Poison King's situation was not much better. Empress Dowager and the other women directed their anger toward him and pursued him everywhere, nearly forcing him into hiding in great ruins as well. Fortunately, Imperial Preceptor took him in. Qin Mu only knew these events from rumors and did not know the exact details. But he knew that Little Poison King had inherited Apothecary's teachings and that his poison attainments were already approaching those of his master. Emperor Yangfeng explained that he had invited Qin Mu and Little Poison King because both were disciples of Jade-Face Poison King, with Qin Mu proficient in medicine and Little Poison King proficient in poison. If the two worked together, they might be able to cure both Emperor Yangfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. Qin Mu accepted the emperor's command and expressed his desire to see what his senior brother could do. Little Poison King first examined Emperor Yangfeng's injuries and then examined the effects of Qin Mu's treatment. The warts covering his face became increasingly frightening as he smiled, and he praised Qin Mu's ability to resolve 1,000 opportunities poison within a single night. At the same time, Qin Mu examined Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, who had been treated by Little Poison King since their return to the capital. Qin Mu also acknowledged that Little Poison King was impressive, particularly in the way he had used 1,000 opportunities poison. Suddenly, a wart near Little Poison King's arm burst open, releasing several transparent little spiders. The spiders climbed out, released webs, and struck the center of Emperor Yangfeng's brows. They then followed the spider silk into his spirit embryo divine treasure. Little Poison King calmly explained that he had never intended to poison the emperor to death and that poisoning a cult master was not difficult for him. Qin Mu remained expressionless and activated Green Heaven's eyes. causing 2 additional heavens to appear within his eyes as he examined Imperial Preceptor's injuries. He replied that even if Little Poison King had poisoned the Emperor's physical body to death, Qin Mu could preserve his soul and save him after removing the poison. He further warned that cult masters were not people Little Poison King could casually poison, because a cult master could kill someone without even meeting them. Devil cults in particular possessed countless strange methods that could make someone die in an inexplicable yet seemingly natural manner. Qin Mu sarcastically warned that Little Poison King would understand this if he someday found himself dead in a filthy sewer. Little Poison King responded with a sinister expression, while Qin Mu smiled pleasantly. The two stared directly at each other, and their verbal confrontation immediately intensified. Emperor Yangfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor both felt their hearts pound with fear as the murderous intent between the two physicians grew stronger. Ling Yusho noticed that the situation was becoming uncontrollable and reminded both men that treating the injuries was more important. Imperial Preceptor and Emperor Yangfeng also coughed, and Emperor Yangfeng told Ling Yusho to leave the hall first. After she left, Little Poison King continued examining Emperor Yangfeng. The warts on his face burst open again, releasing insects resembling fish that entered the Emperor's other divine treasures. After examining them, Little Poison King admitted that Qin Mu's treatment was impressive because Qin Mu had already eliminated the hidden damage in Emperor Yangfeng's divine treasures and completely healed the injuries to his physical body and soul. However, Little Poison King pointed out that Qin Mu's medical expertise was still insufficient to treat the Emperor's divine treasures themselves. Qin Mu then examined the remnants of the god's divine arts inside Imperial Preceptor. He saw that Little Poison King had transformed poisonous substances into technique-dissolving spirit silks and used them to coil around the remnants. These spirit silks could dissolve techniques, divine arts, and even vital qi, but their effect was limited against the divine arts left behind by a god. Qin Mu praised Little Poison King's poison technique, saying that it had reached the perfect state in which poison possessed both material form and internal spirit. He specifically acknowledged that the technique dissolving spirit silks had been used skillfully. Although he believed the technique could still be elevated further, the two again exchanged hostile gazes, making Emperor Yangfeng and Imperial Preceptor nervous that they might start fighting with poison and medicine inside their bodies. Imperial Preceptor asked the two divine physicians whether they had any method to solve his injuries. Little Poison King immediately stated that he was already quite confident about treating Emperor Yangfeng. Since the Emperor's divine treasures had been destroyed, he could obtain the divine treasures of a living person and transfer them into the Emperor's body. Emperor Yangfeng asked how certain he was. Little Poison King hesitated and glanced at Qin Mu, admitting that because he specialized in poison rather than medicine, he could not give a definite level of confidence. Qin Mu then explained that Imperial Preceptor's injuries could not be solved simply through the technique dissolving spirit silks because the fundamental problem was that the remnants of the god's divine arts were too powerful. He proposed finding several dozen powerful cult master-level practitioners to suppress those remnants, allowing Imperial Preceptor to use his own cultivation to refine them. Imperial Preceptor acknowledged that Eternal Peace Empire did possess several dozen cult master-level experts, but gathering all of them to help him would be extremely difficult. Since one physician specialized in poison and the other in medicine, he suggested that the two might complement each other. Qin Mu and Little Poison King looked at one another. Little Poison King explained that their master, Jade Face Poison King, had been unparalleled in both poison and medicine, capable of using medicine to strengthen poison and poison to strengthen medicine. He then asked Qin Mu how many times Qin Mu could strengthen his poison. Qin Mu answered that it depended on how intense Little Poison King's poison was. Qin Mu could use medicine to greatly replenish Emperor Yangfeng's vital qi and increase his life force, allowing his own vitality to repair the damage in his divine treasures. However, he needed Little Poison King's poison to increase the medicinal effect by 30 to 50 times. Little Poison King arrogantly replied that he could make his poison as powerful as Qin Mu wanted and warned that he was more worried Qin Mu's tonic would not be able to withstand his toxins. To refine the remnants of the divine arts inside Imperial Preceptor, the toxicity of his technique dissolving spirit silks needed to increase by 30 to 50 times. At such a level, even gods could be poisoned to death and reduced to skeletons. He challenged Qin Mu to prove that he could create a tonic capable of supporting such toxicity. Qin Mu gritted his teeth and said that he could try. Venomous insects then crawled out of Emperor Yangfeng's body and returned to the warts on Little Poison King's hands and face. Little Poison King chuckled and threatened that if Qin Mu failed to create such a tonic, he would poison Qin Mu to death. Qin Mu calmly answered that if Little Poison King used the wrong toxin, he would make sure to keep him alive so that he could personally take him back to Great Ruins. Little Poison King's expression changed drastically, and he coldly snorted before raising his brush and writing down a list of poisonous herbs. Qin Mu likewise wrote down his own medicinal prescription. Both physicians told Emperor Yangfeng to send people to collect the herbs, then threw down their brushes and silently sat down. Emperor Yangfeng and Imperial Preceptor looked at each other helplessly because the two physicians had such fierce tempers that they seemed less interested in treating their patients than in killing each other. Emperor Yangfeng summoned the imperial physicians waiting outside and ordered them to obtain the herbs immediately. The imperial physicians took the prescriptions and hurried away. Little Poison King sinisterly remarked that Qin Mu's tonic seemed quite powerful. Qin Mu ignored him. After the imperial physicians returned with all the poisonous and healing herbs, Qin Mu immediately began refining the medicinal energy. He activated his Overlord Body 3 elixir technique and repeatedly transformed his body into different forms, including the cow-headed, human-bodied Mars Sovereign and tiger-headed, human-bodied Venus Sovereign, as well as Mercury Sovereign, Jupiter Sovereign, and Saturn Sovereign. By changing his physical form and vital qi, he extracted the different medicinal energies from the herbs. At the same time, Little Poison King used the poisonous herbs to cultivate his venomous insects. He fed the poisonous substances to the insects, refined the creatures into poisonous pills, and then fed those poisonous pills to other venomous insects. He repeated this process several times until he finally raised a huge pitch-black spider with red eyes. Poisonous gas condensed around the spider and did not disperse. On Qin Mu's side, he took several seeds and began planting flowers directly inside the hall. He planted the seeds within the spirit pills he had refined and used the earth eon creation technique to make the flowers absorb the medicinal energy. Soon the flowers bloomed and produced fruits. Qin Mu picked the required spirit fruits and refined them again. After repeating the process several more times, the mountain-like pile of herbs was finally condensed into 7 spirit pills and 1 red pellet. Qin Mu picked them up and looked toward Little Poison King. By that time, Little Poison King had refined the huge spider to death, producing a string of almost invisible spirit silks and a small bottle of poisonous liquid. The two looked at each other before exchanging their products. Qin Mu threw the red pellet to Little Poison King, while Little Poison King threw the poisonous liquid to Qin Mu. Qin Mu squeezed out a smile and gently told Emperor Yangfeng that it was time to take his medicine. Emperor Yangfeng's heart began pounding as he looked at the 7 spirit pills and the bottle of poisonous liquid in Qin Mu's hands. He nervously asked about the toxicity. Qin Mu admitted that it was extremely powerful and even told the emperor that if he died, Qin Mu would avenge him. Imperial Preceptor likewise hesitated as he looked at the red pellet and spider silks before him. Little Poison King reassured him that there was nothing to worry about and that he would be fine. Qin Mu then transformed into a shadow and entered Emperor Yangfeng's divine treasures. He placed the 7 spirit pills into the 7 realms and poured several drops of poisonous liquid onto each pill before withdrawing. On the other side, Little Poison King slapped the spirit silks into Imperial Preceptor's body, then pulled a strand of spider silk from the patient's mouth. He wrapped the spider silk around the red pellet and stuffed it into Imperial Preceptor's mouth. The moment the medicine and poison took effect, a world-shaking explosion came from Emperor Yangfeng's body. The hair all over his body began growing wildly, while his bones expanded at the same time. His body grew so rapidly that his clothes could no longer contain him. His head became larger, his beard grew outward like weeds, and the hair on his head extended in every direction. His chest and leg hair became extremely thick and even tore apart his dragon robe. Before long, Emperor Yangfeng had become a giant more than 30 yards tall. He collapsed onto the ground, unable to move, while his enormous hair covered half of the hall and almost completely buried his body. Qin Mu's eyes twitched as he remarked that Little Poison King's poison was a little too intense. Meanwhile, the effects on Imperial Preceptor were also extreme. Transparent spider silks began pouring from his eyes. ears, mouth, and nose, while countless strands emerged from the pores of his skin and wrapped around his entire body. He soon resembled an enormous dumpling tightly wrapped in spider silk. Little Poison King looked at him with a grave expression and commented that Qin Mu's tonic seemed a little too nourishing. The two physicians once again stared at each other, then simultaneously raised their brushes and began writing new prescriptions. When they were about to call Emperor Yangfeng to order the imperial physicians to gather more herbs, they remembered that the emperor was still completely buried beneath his enormous hair. Therefore, they could only cough and summon the imperial physicians outside themselves. The imperial physicians waiting outside trembled with fear when they saw the thick hair spreading from inside the hall and crawling down the steps. After they returned with another batch of herbs, Qin Mu immediately began refining again, while Little Poison King hurried to cultivate and refine his venomous insects once more. Qin Mu had to take out his two pig-slaughtering knives and chop away countless strands of hair just to locate Emperor Yangfeng. And even then it required considerable effort to deliver the medicine into his body. At the same time, the warts on Little Poison King's face burst open again, and his venomous insects carried the refined medicine into the cocoon surrounding Imperial Preceptor. The two physicians carefully observed the results and suddenly realized that the poison and medicine were still imbalanced. Although the emperor's hair had finally stopped growing, poison had begun pouring out from his various orifices, while Imperial Preceptor's hair had started growing instead. Realizing that their previous combination was still unsuitable, Qin Mu and Little Poison King hurriedly picked up their brushes and began writing yet another set of prescriptions. Qin Mu and the Little Poison King changed their prescriptions 7 or 8 times, and both of them gradually became flustered. Since this was the first time they had cooperated, there were inevitably places where their methods did not fit together perfectly. Moreover, both wanted to surpass the other. So Qin Mu deliberately made the tonic he gave the Little Poison King's patient 60 times stronger than normal rather than merely 30 or 50 times stronger. While the Little Poison King likewise increased the toxicity of the poisonous liquid he gave Qin Mu's patient. Their competition caused Emperor Yangfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor to suffer endlessly. The two patients could not move, struggle, or even call for help. Emperor Yangfeng's body first shrank back to its ordinary size, but it continued shrinking until he became the size of a newborn baby. Buried beneath the enormous amount of hair covering his body, the emperor bitterly wished that he had stationed executioners in the hall to kill the two scoundrels of divine physicians. Meanwhile, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor continued swelling. He could feel something growing on his buttocks, which turned out to be a furry tail. His armpits became itchy as additional bones grew there, cracked apart, and extended outward like two wings. Unfortunately, the wings stopped growing after reaching only about 1 foot in length. The two patients repeatedly alternated between unbearable cold and heat. At times, they felt as if they had fallen into hell and were rolling across mountains of knives. At other times, they experienced the blissful sensation of becoming immortals. However, the comfortable moments were actually more dangerous because their souls were dissolving. At other times, waves of pain surged through their entire bodies, hundreds or even thousands of times more painful than extreme heartache. They sometimes felt as if tens of thousands of needles were stabbing them, while at other times they felt as if they had been submerged in an unbearably acidic vat of vinegar. In the hall, Qin Mu sat on the floor covered by the emperor's hair. He held his brush in one hand and supported his chin with the other, staring blankly because he could not determine how to continue. The Little Poison King paced anxiously nearby, his brows tightly furrowed as he repeatedly considered possible methods of treatment. Both physicians had encountered a difficult problem. Qin Mu raised his brush several times but could not bring himself to write down a prescription, while the Little Poison King also repeatedly raised and lowered his brush. At that moment, Ling Yusho poked her head into the hall and quietly asked Qin Mu how things were going. Before Qin Mu could answer, the Little Poison King recognized her as the 6th princess. Ling Yusho explained that since her elder brother had become the eldest prince, she was indeed now the 6th princess. The Little Poison King then pointed out that the eldest prince was also Crown Prince Yushu and sarcastically congratulated her, saying that because of the quack's treatment, her brother would soon ascend the throne and become emperor. Ling Yusho was shocked and immediately looked anxiously at Qin Mu, almost crying as she asked whether he intended to cure her father to death. Qin Mu reassured her that her father would not die. but then mocked the little Poison King, saying that before he could cure the emperor to death, the little Poison King would probably treat the imperial preceptor to death. Without the imperial preceptor's support, Crown Prince Yushu would be overthrown within a few days even if he successfully became emperor. Ling Yusho was nearly in tears and asked whether the two physicians were only trying to frighten her. The little Poison King mocked Qin Mu by saying that even if the imperial preceptor died in his hands, it would be because Qin Mu's tonic had nourished him to death. Qin Mu immediately retorted that although the emperor might be treated to death by him, the emperor would have died from the little Poison King's poison anyway. So the little Poison King should forget about leaving the palace alive. The two physicians glared at each other, anger burning in their eyes, and each wanted to poison the other to death. Furious, Ling Yusho shouted that if her father and the imperial preceptor died because of their treatments, neither physician would leave the palace alive. She then called for the executioners. Emperor Yangfeng and Eternal Peace imperial preceptor both secretly breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the sixth princess was still sensible. Otherwise, if the two divine physicians continued competing, the two patients would certainly end up dead or barely alive. The palace's imperial guards quickly swarmed over and stationed themselves outside the hall. Ling Yusho put her hands on her waist and angrily ordered Qin Mu and the little Poison King to obey her because the executioners were waiting outside. She pointed out that one physician could not suppress the other's tonic and the other could not handle the other's poison, so they should simply exchange patients. She ordered the little Poison King to treat the emperor and Qin Mu to treat the imperial preceptor. Qin Mu immediately stood up, looked at the little Poison King, and agreed to swap patients. The little Poison King's eyes lit up as he realized that if Qin Mu treated the imperial preceptor while he treated the emperor, they might actually create a miracle. They immediately exchanged patients and carefully examined each other's work. After doing so, both physicians secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Just moments earlier, Qin Mu had already been considering taking the dragon Qilin and fleeing into great ruins, while the little Poison King had likewise planned to escape and hide. The experts outside the hall would not necessarily have been able to stop either of them, since an apothecary only needed a sufficient dose of poison to kill. However, after switching patients, they discovered that each could repair and neutralize the damage caused by the other. Therefore, neither needed to flee after accidentally causing the deaths of the emperor or the imperial preceptor. Qin Mu and the little Poison King raised their brushes and wrote down new prescriptions for the imperial physicians to collect the necessary herbs. They then carefully diagnosed and treated their respective patients, repeatedly adjusting their prescriptions. After nearly 3 days of treatment, the hair covering Emperor Yangfeng's body finally fell away, while the cocoon surrounding Eternal Peace imperial preceptor gradually disappeared. The imperial preceptor's injuries steadily improved. The remaining traces of the god's divine arts weakened, and he gradually regained enough cultivation to mobilize some of his power. The emperor's divine treasures were still in ruins, but the little Poison King used countless venomous spiders to transport vital qi and life force to them and help rebuild them. Qin Mu's medicine also supplied a powerful life force that aided the restoration. With these treatments, the emperor and imperial preceptor no longer had any major problems, and their remaining injuries would heal with time. Ling Yusho then summoned several eunuchs to clean the palace. The eunuchs needed several carts just to transport the enormous amount of hair that had fallen from the emperor. Another cart was filled with the tails, wings, extra arms, and extra legs that had fallen from the imperial preceptor's body. Qin Mu stated that there were truly no major problems remaining. At that moment, he and the little Poison King looked at each other and immediately sneered. Ling Yusho became nervous because they seemed ready to fight again, so she immediately warned them not to fight. Qin Mu wrote another prescription for the imperial physicians and then stretched his body, explaining that he had spent several days diagnosing and treating the emperor and imperial preceptor and was exhausted, so he intended to return to rest. The little Poison King likewise claimed that he was tired and wanted to sleep, adding sinisterly that the remaining work could be left to the quacks outside. Ling Yusho looked at the little Poison King and then told Qin Mu that she would accompany him back to Imperial College. Qin Mu hesitated because Ling Yusho had also gone without rest for 2 days, but she firmly insisted. Qin Mu eventually agreed. They waited briefly for the imperial physicians to return with the herbs. The little Poison King tried to identify the herbs by smell, But the hall had been filled with the strong scent of countless medicines used over the previous days, making it difficult for him to distinguish anything. Qin Mu took the herbs, and Ling Yusho hurried after him. The little Poison King followed as well. When they reached Jade Band River within the palace, the little Poison King suddenly jumped into the water with a splash and disappeared without resurfacing. Ling Yusho cried out in surprise and realized that he had escaped through the river. She asked Qin Mu whether the little Poison King was afraid of him. Qin Mu shook his head and explained that the little Poison King was not afraid of him, he was afraid of Empress Dowager. Immediately afterward, Jade Band River suddenly surged upward into the sky, its water forming something like an enormous silver python. 2 palace maids carrying lanterns approached and illuminated the river. Countless sword lights emerged from the flames of their lanterns and shot into the river in every direction. The 2 palace maids then saluted toward a tall building and reported that the little Poison King was not in the river. Qin Mu and Ling Yusho looked toward the building and saw Empress Dowager standing on its balcony. She had raised one hand and now gently lowered it. The water of Jade Band River immediately crashed downward and returned to the canal. Qin Mu saluted Empress Dowager. She smiled and asked whether the emperor had been cured. Qin Mu answered that the emperor still needed to recuperate but would recover to his peak within several years. Empress Dowager nodded and ordered Ling Yusho to take the 2 palace maids with her and escort Qin Mu back to Imperial College. Ling Yusho replied that she had already intended to return to Imperial College with Qin Mu. Empress Dowager then entered the building while the 2 lantern-carrying palace maids followed Qin Mu and Ling Yusho.